What's up, guys? It's Kelly Shalal, registered dietitian behind Hungry Hobby, and today I'm jumping on. I have my computer because I needed a cheat sheet to talk about seed cycling. Now, today's post is going to be an answer to some common questions that I get asked about seed cycling. But first, let me give you a little backstory on what seed cycling is. So seed cycling is a method of rotating specific seeds at different times in the month. I used this method to help me get my period back after 5 years of not having it. I got off the birth control and then did not have periods for 5 years after that. I tried multiple protocols of seed cycling and not all of them worked for me. So some protocols are a little less intense than others. The one that I share on my blog, which I'll link to below, or if you're watching this on the blog, you'll see a link. The one that I used is pretty aggressive. The one that I used that finally helped my cycles come back was pretty aggressive. You may or may not need an aggressive form like that. Also, I also see different protocols of seed cycling with different seeds at different times, and I get questions about that. As we're going to dive into what seed cycling is and what research there is actually very little research on it, and so the protocols are all kind of put together by different natural doctors, and there isn't like one set protocol. It's kind of what that doctor believes to be the right answer. So that'll make more sense when we go through like what it is, but just know that if you see multiple protocols on the internet, it is because there's just no set anything out there. So the protocol I used, for example, was 2 tablespoons of ground flax or chia seed. I chose flax, and 2 tablespoons of hemp seeds. It said ground, but I didn't do ground. And that's one of the common questions that I get about seed cycling is, do all your seeds have to be ground? Flax seeds, definitely. All the protocols out there will say yes, they need to be fresh, raw, and ground. I did not grind mine. I only ground the flaxseed, and that was fine for me. I used sunflower butter. I even used roasted seeds in some cases. I mean, again, this is not the type of thing that is just like 100% like this is how you have to do it. So I don't believe that your seeds have to be totally ground, although almost every protocol on the internet will tell you that it needs to be. So do your seeds need to be ground for seed cycling? I don't think so, just the flaxseed, because you cannot digest flaxseed in whole form, but everything else should be fine. So that's my answer on that. So I did 2 tablespoons of ground flax, 2 tablespoons of hemp seeds in the first half of my cycle, and then I did 2 tablespoons of pumpkin seeds, 2 tablespoons of sunflower seeds in the second half of my cycle. Now, the idea here is to support the different phases of your cycle. So your menstrual cycle actually has 2 phases, which is why it comes in 28 to 30 some odd days, typically. And that's because the first half of your cycle is estrogen dominant. And the whole point of the first half of your cycle is getting that egg ready to be released, building up the uterine lining, and just getting everything ready for that egg to come out. Your hormones do a lot of other things that have a lot of impacts on your body. I highly, highly recommend a book I just read called This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, that talks about just what like your different behaviors are. She's an evolutionary scientist, and so it talks about like what your brain does in different parts of your cycle and like what we've been programmed to do. It's really interesting, and like how birth control changes that, not necessarily good or bad, but there are a lot of changes that come along with the estrogen dominant part of your cycle. It's typically 14 days, but not always. All right, so for instance, my follicular phase is typically closer to 18 days, whereas my luteal phase is shorter, and so that's the second half. So anyway, my point being is that your follicular phase may be somewhere between 12, 10, I don't know. You have to track it to figure out what yours is. But we say 1 to 14 days because that's the average, but it's basically the first day of your period to ovulation. That's the follicular phase. It's estrogen dominant, and so the idea is to support the right form of estrogen being dominant in that cycle. So the thought process is that because flax seeds are really, really high in lignans, that that will help bind some of the excess forms of estrogen that might be being produced and get rid of that, so that estradiol is the one that we want to be dominant, actually being dominant. And also it's high in omega-3, so it'll help like the production of hormones in general. And then there's some phytoestrogen debate about like it having weak pro and negative estrogen effects depending on the dose. Again, we don't have any research for literally any of this, so a lot of it's bro science, or in this case fem science. Okay, so we're basing it off of what we know about specific properties and kind of piecing this all together. Again, this is a typical protocol given out by natural doctors. It helped me, it's helped a lot of my clients, but we're going to talk about in what scenarios that will be helpful with. But as a registered dietitian, I have to be very clear that like there are 0 studies on like X number of women going through seed cycling and it having X effect, okay? There are some small studies on flaxseed in particular in doing a bunch of stuff, improving like the potential of ovulation, regulating cycles, decreasing breast pain, increasing your luteal phase, which is the next phase we're going to talk about. So there is some significant benefit research on flaxseed in particular. So a lot of times I will have my clients just do the flaxseed and nothing else and see how that goes, depending on the situation. If there's someone that doesn't really want to do the whole thing, is not really into it, like some people are really into it and they want to do the whole protocol. I did, and it worked great for me. But if someone's, say, just like barely getting off birth control and wanting to just kind of improve their fertility but not like jump into like the whole world of fertility and all the things you can do, then I might have them just do the flax. In fact, I had a friend do that recently, and it definitely helped. So that's kind of it for the research part of it. So that's the follicular phase. Once you've ovulated, from ovulation until your period starts, it's called the luteal phase. The luteal phase is somewhere between 10 days to typically no longer than 15, maybe 16 max. In order to sustain pregnancy, we need 11 or 12 days. And so it is important for that phase to be 11 or 12 days. If you are tracking your cycle and you find that it is shorter than 11 or 12 days and you're trying to get pregnant and having an issue, then that's something you need to discuss with your doctor. For sure, find a doctor that's into charting and understands all of those things, because that's going to definitely make you more likely to have a chemical pregnancy or early miscarriage. So it is important to have at least 11 or 12 day luteal phase. For me, that wasn't even enough, and I had to be on progesterone in order to sustain a pregnancy. So that's that. So the luteal phase is progesterone dominant, which is why I was on progesterone in order to sustain pregnancy. Now, progesterone, its whole job is to take an egg that's been released that may have potentially been fertilized and like nurture it and love it and make a home for it, basically, so that pregnancy can be sustained. And that's why you need that 11 or 12 days, because that's how long it could potentially take a embryo to implant. And if your progesterone doesn't stay up high enough, long enough, the egg actually doesn't get to implant. And so that could be a problem if you're trying to get pregnant. So the point of seed cycling is to support the progesterone dominant of your phase, or the progesterone dominant phase, which is known as the luteal phase, by providing the right nutrients. So healthy fats found in the seeds, typically, I've seen this protocol mixed all the way around. Flax is always in the follicular first phase, but then I've seen everything under the sun. So the protocol I use is pumpkin seed and sunflower seed, because those are vitamin E rich, and pumpkin seed is zinc rich and also protein rich, which are thought to be nutrients that support progesterone. But again, there's very little research on this. My naturopath also recommended sesame seeds to be in that phase. I never used it. I've never had clients use it. They're really hard to get in. What do you do with sesame seeds? I don't know. Eat some hummus. That's the best I did. So, but the sesame seeds would have that lignin effect, which would help kind of ideally flush out extra hormones that don't need to be there, and have those like weak anti-estrogenic effects it's all like pro or con depending on the dose. So again, I'm basically sitting here and telling you there's zero research on it, but I find it extremely effective. It's crazy. But I only find it effective in certain groups. So again, I've only found certain protocols effective, and now that I've used this with hundreds of my clients, I've only found it effective in certain groups. So for instance, if you are on birth control, seed cycling is not going to be effective because basically you're taking artificial hormones, right? And so the artificial hormones are like what's dictating your cycle, and because those are dictating your cycle, you can't do anything about those. So like no matter what you eat or do, like you're not gonna have any effect on what you're taking externally or getting a shot or IUD or whatever. Now I don't know, like the non-hormonal birth control options, that like the non-hormonal IUD, like maybe it would have an effect, but again, you're going to see the most benefit of this if you're someone who does not take birth control. And I actually do recommend it starting at the last month that you're going to be on birth control is the month that I recommend starting seed cycling to help support those hormones. So it will not help you if you're on birth control, but it can help the transition off of birth control. Keep in mind what happened to me was that I got off birth control and didn't have a period for 5 years, but that's not normal. Typically you should have a cycle within 6 months to a year at max. If you go 6 months without having a cycle, you should definitely go see your OBGYN so that they can run tests to make sure that they rule out more serious conditions like a pituitary tumor or something like that. I had all those tests to rule all of those out, and it took a really long time for me. So the next question is, will seed cycling help with amenorrhea, which is what I had, the lack of menstrual cycle? I believe it will, but the thing about amenorrhea is it's a tricky beast, and each woman, it's very unique to each woman because each woman has her own unique HPA axis, which is basically, I think of it like your stress axis, okay? And it's related to gonadal hormones, which are like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and what's going to trigger that to turn back on, because basically it's off because it's protecting your body from pregnancy. It's saying, hey, we're under so much stress right now that we cannot sustain a pregnancy. We need to be ready to like run from the nearest tiger. So we're not like, no hormones, no pregnancy, bam, right? And so what's causing that could be medication effects, obviously hyper responded to birth control, like a unique hyper response to birth control, over exercise, over emotional stress, not eating enough, so like physical stress by not having enough calories in. A big range of things can affect that. I did find seed cycling helpful in combination with massively reducing my stress levels and increasing my positive outlook. Really, like those were the big things. But I also got off some medication that may have been hindering my ovulation and just a lot of things. I've worked with so many women with amenorrhea now. I can tell you for myself and from working with them that it is highly individualized. But the best thing about seed cycling and any of these things is it's not going to hurt, because basically all these seeds that I listed off, the hemp seed, the flaxseed, the chia seeds, the sesame seeds, sunflower, pumpkin seeds, those are all so nutrient dense that like you're not going to go wrong taking them, like by any stretch of the imagination. So it can't hurt. And especially in the case of amenorrhea, it's going to provide some extra healthy fat calories, which is what you want. That is why I love seed cycling so much for fertility, and I definitely think I continued to seed cycle and really got back on it before I wanted to get pregnant. Once I got my period back, I waited about a year at the advice of my naturopath so that my progesterone could rebound. And that is why I recommend seed cycling for fertility reasons. For fertility, all those extra nutrients, even if they don't work to regulate your hormones, which they may help you regulate your hormones, it's going to help provide all these kind of nutrients to mom and potential baby. So it's definitely beneficial for fertility. 100%, you can't go wrong there. Now, as far as irregular periods and symptoms of like PCOS, those are other conditions I like to recommend this for, depending on how off your cycles are. It can take quite some time. Now, with all of these things, if you're not having a cycle or your cycle is so irregular, it's recommended that you follow the moon cycles. Naturopaths believe that women's cycles should sync up to the moon cycles in gravity and that we should all be the same. I mean, that's like super hippy dippy for me, but it seems to work. So if you're not having a cycle or your cycle's so irregular you don't know where to start, you'll sync up with the moon cycle, and it's on the blog. I'll link it linked below, but I think it's like new moon to full moon and then full moon to half moon. I'd have to look that up, but I'll leave a link below so you can check that out on the blog, because that's how I did it and how I got my period to come back. And my period stayed synced with the moon for a really, really long time. It was crazy. So the last group of people who may wonder if seed cycling benefits for them would be those with endometriosis and those with menopause. And these are two groups that I don't typically recommend seed cycling for. Endometriosis has really an unknown etiology, and it doesn't have as much to do with like hormone irregularity, and it can't hurt you if you want to try it, but I would look more at supplements that I'd be potentially recommending for an endometriosis client versus seed cycling being my first recommendation. Same thing with menopause. I used to recommend it all the time because I had such great results with my clients that were had irregular cycles. I have never found it to be that effective for a menopausal client. So I've stopped recommending it at this point. I think, when you're doing seed cycling, when you have a cycle or you're trying to get a cycle, it's supporting your body's natural processes. When you do it during menopause, you're kind of like going against the natural process, and that's like a whole nother can of worms that I totally recommend you working with a trusted naturopath with. I mean, you can work with an RD. I know there are RDs that are, specialized in hormones like I am, but I think that naturopaths really have just like a better handle on it. Like that's one of their bread and butter things. So that's just my thought. But for menopause in particular, I have had clients who have benefited from it in perimenopause though. So like if you're teetering on the edge and you want to go back to cycling kind of regularly, it can be beneficial for you. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Again, the seed cycling thing in and of itself is mostly pro science. So you have to take it for what it's worth, but it can't hurt, and all it does is provide lots and lots of nutrients, and there is some beneficial research on flax. So going along with it isn't going to hurt you, and it may just help you. It will take 30 days for you to see a benefit. It can take up to 90 days to benefit. Keep in mind to see a benefit. Keep in mind that it takes 90 days for an egg to actually mature. 90 days for an egg to mature. So that's 3 months before it gets released. It starts to be prepped and primed, right? So it may take 90 plus days, 90 days to 6 months, 3 months to 6 months to see a real benefit from seed cycling. So you need to give it that long of giving your body all those nutrients at the right time. I'm just scanning through my list here to see if I forgot of anything. And I don't think that I did. So if you've got any questions, like I said, I'll leave the link to the protocol that I used and my story about having amenorrhea for so long and all of that below, or if you're watching this in the blog post, you'll have the links to it. And I hope that this kind of helps answer some of your questions you might have about seed cycling. I'm definitely pro seed cycling. I think that there's a really, like I said, really, really nutrient dense, supportive seeds that you can be consuming. One of the healthiest, like the most healthiest foods in the planet probably. And so there's no downside to seed cycling if done correctly. I mean, there really is. I can't think of anything. The biggest downside is that you do it and you don't see the benefit that you were really hoping for, but your body will still thank you for all those extra healthy fats and vitamins and nutrients, right? All those seeds are rich in omega-3s and omega-6s and the right types of omega-6s, and it's good. So definitely don't feel bad about trying it, even like if you have a condition where you don't necessarily think it will work, or if you're skeptical and you don't really think it's going to be like the end-all be-all, it's still worth giving a try because it is just so many nutrient-dense seeds in your diet. So again, I hope that helps clear up some of your questions about seed cycling, and if you have any more, feel free to comment below or comment on the blog post. I'm happy to answer them, and I hope that you all are having a wonderful start to your new year. All right, guys. See you again soon.